Hello students. This is the second video that links to the September 4th remote class. This one is really covering an expansion of the first video where we looked at sort of the basics of what Pro was, opened a new map, and connected a piece of data. And we ended that by dragging in this one called neighborhood crime population. And this video will actually look a little bit more at the interface itself. We won't dive deeply into this data, but this will really be like a point-and-click experimentation. Suddenly we have a piece of information we never had before on this map, and we have so many options up here about how to engage and move around it. So consider this an orientation video to the interface of ArcPro. The next video after this, as I had mentioned, will dive into a little more of what we saw here. Right? We're almost pausing for a second on the wealth of other information types that we saw in the folder I asked you to connect to. But no, we'll have a video that explores what each of these mean, why their shapes are different, why that's important, and so on. But right now, I just want to orient us to the map. Now, what we've done is we've dragged in neighborhood crime population, and suddenly we have zoomed into what I hope those of you who are familiar with this area will see is in fact Philadelphia. There is the familiar shape of Philadelphia right here. If I were to turn off the crimes, I can see the city itself in the background. What I have dragged in here that I will examine in greater depth in the data video is a shapefile. A shapefile is ArcGIS's way of processing geographic data. It's the same thing you could think about. Microsoft Word processes docs, PowerPoint processes PPTs, right? Adobe processes PDFs. It's the type of data file we use here. It's not the only type. We'll learn throughout the semester of others, such as raster, and even other translations of geographic data, like how Google Maps uses something different, right? Maybe they call it a KML. But for now, just know that this is a shapefile. You may also see this called a feature, right? A geographic feature. This is the predominant thing that we will be mapping here, a feature or a shapefile. What is it? Well, it's a series of neighborhoods. And they maybe tell us some information. Let's do a little sneak peek. Why not just click on one of them and see what happens? A little advanced for this video, because I'll walk through this on the one where we orient ourselves to different types of data. But even if I just click on something, which is always a recommended step for me, Rick, click or right click to see new elements you didn't know before. A pop-up comes up and tells me a lot of stuff that maybe doesn't make sense, but maybe for some might. I see that its name is Ogons, and that for some reason there's 3 different spellings of it. I see measurements in length and area. I don't quite know what the units are. Perhaps that'll be a question we ask ourselves in future videos. And I see this interesting piece of information. And I can perhaps decipher now that in the neighborhood of Ogons, in 2010, had 14,000 people living in it. 3,000 homes were owned. 2,316 units were rented. Just know that those are units, right? Those aren't actually people, so that's why the numbers are smaller. And at that time, I think this data is from 2015, there were 40 burglaries that occurred at a various point there. So it's our first link to the eye, right? GIS. And in the next video, when we talk data structures, I'll dive into this more. But we are seeing a piece of geography, the neighborhoods here, and within each neighborhood, we are seeing information. Click on another neighborhood, and that information changes. Putting these two together is what allows us to map what's not quite there. Map the beauty of the spatial world. Understand both an object and the information around it to create visualizations and analytics that power everything from real estate development to demographics to land use certification to transportation planning and so on and so forth. But lest I lose myself in the data, let's pause and first walk through what we've sort of seen. The only other thing I'll ask you to do is just drag in farmers markets. Just to practice that again, we see quite different. I don't want to talk about it yet. In the video on data structures, we'll talk about why this looks like a point and this looks like a rectangle. But I mostly wanted to drag them in so that we now have multiple things we can move around, right? I can actually begin stacking. I could grab one and move it below the other. Farmers markets have not disappeared. They simply are underneath the neighborhoods. And I could toggle the neighborhoods, and there they are. Everything is okay. I can move them back up again. These here is your contents. This is what you are mapping and what you are looking at here. One neat thing we can do, if you right-click on map, notice there's a number of elements I can do here. There's another way I can add data, right? I taught you to drag it in from your catalog over here, which is the primary mechanism that we use to engage with data. But you could just add it here. This is our first example that there are innumerable pathways in ArcGIS to accomplish the same outcome. And you will do what makes the most sense for you as we proceed throughout this semester. In a couple of moments, we'll go through this concept of properties, for what we're seeing here, because it's a little advanced. But I kind of just wanted to show you this idea of a group layer. Click on that real quick. Something says group layer. Maybe click on it again. You can name it. Call it grouping stuff. And the neat thing is I can start dragging my other features into it. What I'm playing around with here is a word you're going to hear me say frequently called a layer. And I'll reinforce this again in the data video, but a layer, it's more like a visual representation of the data, right? The data is a shapefile. When I drag it in, it becomes a layer, something I can turn off, that I can turn on, that I can organize how they look, that I can group, all within my map. All within my map, or sometimes called data frame. Same thing, I can also change the name of that. If I don't want it to be called map, right, I can click on it and name it my first map. And notice that will also change there. Map, my first map. This is my contents. This is how I look at the various pieces of data, turn them on and off and organize them. And as we'll see in future videos, how I also organize, change their appearance, and innumerable other elements. But let's go up to the top. Now it pushes you to insert first. And typically the reason that it does this is in case you wanted to create a new map or sort of add something if you have a blank project. But I'd rather go to that second and come over here to map. You can click on project briefly if you want just to see. This is almost like taking you back to that sort of, I want to create a whole new project. Scrap everything I've been working on. I'd like to start from scratch. Right? Save is a way to sort of save everything you've been working on. Portals, licensing options, these are all elements that I'll get into in, sort of a future video. Those are almost like metadata elements. But really, this is sort of how you create a whole new project. Something from sort of scratch rather than what you've been working on. But instead, let's focus on map. And let's quite literally go from left to right and get a sense of what these primary widgets and icons are telling you to do. As we move throughout this semester, we will learn hundreds of these widgets. You are not expected to memorize every single one of them. I will provide you with videos, tutorials, right, additional videos on a YouTube channel, all of which will help you over time build up the muscle memory so you know exactly how to make these things second nature. I mean, remember, there was probably a time you didn't know how to quickly change the font on Microsoft Word, but now you know you would highlight a word and go up and click bold if you wanted to bold it. That's the same thing here. What's more important is we learn what each of these things mean and why we might use them. So it's been helpful to orient them or organize them for us, right? We have a little navigate toolbar here, and its purpose is just as you think, to move throughout the world. Now, explore is the first thing that's kept up, and it'll give you some options if you're more of a keyboarder about how you want to play with stuff. But instead, let's just play around, right? As long as that's located, I can click on the map and I can drag. This is called panning, right? Panning from one space to another. You could control your mouse and scroll back like you're zooming in on a picture or zooming away from a picture, and that will happen. Right? Might even be fun to sort of zoom out all the way and see where we are. Hint about a video that's coming next week. If I zoom out all the way, I can see the world looks pretty weird. Definitely weirder than it looked a couple minutes ago, when it seemed like everything was in alignment. This is what's called a projection. And it's a concept you do not need to know now, but we will review next week. Zoom back in with your mouse. Just orient yourself to how you can easily see the world. But you know what? If you're too lazy to do that, here's a nice little trick. You can always click on the layer you might want to see. And once you navigate the many pieces of information about that layer, you can click to zoom to. Zoom. And you'll zoom down to a view where you could see everything. Cool? What we have here are fixed zooms, right? This is a way I can zoom out and I can zoom in at a more fixed scale. Full extent just means let me view everything in the picture, right? So if I've zoomed in a little bit too much on this, I can hit something like full extent to come back, well, not just to that map, actually, but to the full extent of the world. And why that happened is something that we'll cover in a little bit more detail in the video on projections and geography and why maps look like the way they do. But never fear, right? You find yourself in a place you don't want to be, just click on this arrow, right? And it takes you right back to the extent that you reviewed. And that's an important concept, extent. What extent means, and you'll hear me speak it week over week over week, it's just basically like the window through which I view the world. That's my extent. However zoomed in or panned I am, that's what an extent is. The last piece of information I think is critical on the navigate bar is bookmarks. What a bookmark is it saves the place that you are in the world. Now, click on it and come on down here to new. And maybe I'll call this the best view in the world. And what I've done there is I've created something so that if I'm all over the place and I'm down here and I'm like, oh crud, I really liked the way I was viewing Philly's neighborhoods, I could come right here, go to the best view in the world, shoot, and I'm right back to where I need to be. Now, that is meaningful here because we sometimes find ourselves viewing the world in a manner that is beneficial to us. But it will become even more useful in a future video when we talk about how we move from where we are now, right? We're sort of like in the world, is the best way I can describe it. We are flying around above Philadelphia. We are in the world. We're like a bird. But the software we're using also lets us be a map maker, right? In a little bit, I'll teach you how to step back. What if instead of looking at your data and moving around, you wanted to be sitting at your desk making a map, right? And the map would exist on a piece of paper. And then maybe you want to take it out into something like Adobe Illustrator and design on it. Well, bookmark becomes doubly important in there. So it's something we will come back to a little bit later when we're focused more on sort of how we design content. So pop on over here to layer, right? Layers, who we mentioned before. And you'll notice something cool. We can actually change what's going on in the background, and that's pretty neat, right? This is, ArcPro's default, but, maybe you want to do something, sophisticated and noir. You could break out here your 1930s sort of cool gray background map. Or perhaps you're a big believer in open data, right? And so you'd find yourself to do an open street map. which is basically thought of as the Wikipedia of mapping, and a resource that we'll return to frequently throughout the semester. Well, there you go. You would have that sort of as your new background. You decide what makes the most sense to you. You don't even necessarily have to have one. If you just want to turn it off, you can turn it off. But it allows you to sort of see that image of the world behind you. What is it going to look like? Interestingly enough here, another way to add data. We can drag it in, we can right-click this, we can add it here. 3 different ways to take a piece of data and get it on the map. Now, I am not going to cover these in great detail because we will have a whole video around it. But I do want you to know what they are. Click just on Select and pop Rectangle, for example. You'll get a little cursor that looks a little different here. Point anywhere on the map and click, and then drag. A little box appears, and you will see the shapes that you have touched will become a light fluorescent blue. What you've done here is you've selected data, and it is a critical tool that we will learn in a couple of weeks. It is one of the most important and powerful weapons in your arsenal, and as simple as it seems, it really allows you to take giant sets of data and either manually or using the information, the I, or using where they are, the G, sort that down to more precise cohorts of geography that you want to analyze. So for now, just enough to know that you have it. I am all about exploration in this class. If you feel like you want to dive into some of these ahead and you want to use some videos on the YouTube channel to do it, by all means, please do. But right now, just know sort of selection is what matters the most. So infographics is something I'll pop into in a later week. You know, the only one I think to focus on here on this toolbar maybe is measure. This is just a quick way if you need to sort of statically measure something. You know, hey, how long does it take to get from you, to you, right? That's 18,000 feet. And, you can play around here and choose if you're going to measure distance, or you're going to measure the area, or you're going to measure a feature. And you can choose your unit of measurement if you want to be imperial, metric, or sort of what have you. Last thing we'll see here, download map. Also something that I want to show you in a video where we really focus on interfacing and engaging with ArcGIS Online, which is something we'll probably do in, I think, like the 3rd or the 4th week. So that's the basics of how you orient and navigate your map and how you sort of look at your data. We'll come back in the next video and we'll review what some of the other toolbars are and how you work through them, and then have a video that lets us look at our data structure.